thank you for this man who's willing to come and minister to it, come and wash our feet. And we pray for him. Most especially we do with Lonnie up in the treatment. He's going to have the surgery Thursday and all the radiation and chemo, all the stuff he's going to be put through. I thank you for where his heart is, about how positive he is, and yeah, we just pray for a miracle healing, and be with us tonight as we look at your work in Jesus' name. Amen. I mean, is it silly to pray that they go in to take it out and it's not there?
Exactly. That's what I was praying.
Well, oh, thank you, because
I've been praying the same thing.
Okay, I feel like I pray that and God rolls his eyes and goes, oh my God. But that happens. I mean, that happens to
Sure
people.
does.
It happened to your sister.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what I've been praying, but I wouldn't pray that out loud because I didn't want you to think I was.
Nope.
Well, I heard another story in the car. They said somebody was under surgery like this and it was an empty sack.
It was what?
It was an empty sack when they got to it.
Wow. Yeah.
It was what? What did you say? An empty sack.
An
An
empty
empty
sack.
sack. Oh, it looked like it was a tumor.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. We're picking up with Andrew, but I found something I wrote a long time ago. I can barely read it, but I wanted to share what I can read. I want to share with you, and it's based on this idea that, first of all, we know Jesus as we know no other person. I know I've said that a bunch of times. I mean, His Spirit lives in us. But these are all the ways I came up, the other ways that we know Him. And the reason I think this is important is, the reason we're looking at the lives of His disciples is another way to get to know somebody is to look at who they associate with. Who are their friends, that kind of thing. But, so we know Jesus spiritually, fundamentally. We know Him spiritually, through the Holy Spirit. But we know Him through as the man of sorrows. We know Him through our suffering. We connect with Jesus through our suffering, and that's unique. We know Him metaphorically. All the metaphors He reveals Himself: the way, the truth, the life, the living bread, the gate, the good shepherd, the vine, on and on it goes. We know Him corporately. We know Jesus kind of through the church, His body. We know Him creatively through His creation, but also as He calls us to creatively respond to Him. We know Him theologically, of course. We know Him historically, as we, through the Gospels, through the writings, but also through, there are plenty of historical references to Jesus outside of the Gospels. So I just thought that's pretty cool. Those are all the different ways that we know Him. So, and there are probably more that I can't think of. So we're picking back up with Andrew, Peter's brother. He's the fourth member of the three. Now, Peter, James, and John are the kind of the inner three. Jesus has these concentric circles of intimacy: the 3, the 12, and the 70. But I call Andrew he's the fourth member of the three. And we looked at one passage, I think last week, where Peter, James, and John and Andrew were there. So he was included kind of in the three. He's the first person to know the Messiah. He knew that Jesus was the Messiah before Peter did. I mean, right? Remember, he said, we found the Messiah. So he came and brought Peter. He's from Bethsaida, which is this little town up on the ridge up from the Sea of Galilee. He's got a Greek name, which the commentators, they spin it every way they can. And again, you shouldn't be dogmatic about what the Bible's not dogmatic about. But the commentators say that indicates that there was some kind of cultural openness in this Jewish family, that they give their son a Greek name. Andrew is not a Greek version of some Hebrew name. James is Jacob. It's a Greek version of Yaakov, but Andrew is just a Greek name. So Yeah, and we looked at a couple of passages, and I think we got one more to look at. We looked at when he first went and got Peter. Jesus looked at Peter. We looked at that one. We looked at the calling of the first disciples, and we're going to pick up the feeding of the 5,000, and this is in John 6. John 6. Yeah, I already said that. And I would still like to, and I don't know, maybe I can be dogmatic about this. Maybe not. What do you think? Peter and Andrew are definitely brothers. It says they're brothers. James and John are definitely brothers. It says they're brothers. But in Mark 2:14, Matthew is described as the son of Alphaeus. And in 4 other passages, James is described as the son of Alphaeus. So there's a chance that Matthew and James are brothers. That is, half of the disciples are three sets of brothers. I don't know. I just think that's cool. And Andrew is one of those. He's definitely Peter's brother. So let's look at the feeding of the 5,000. This is the only miracle that's in all 4 Gospels. Of all of Jesus' miracles, isn't that interesting? It's the only one that made it into all 4 Gospels. It's roughly 6 months between the end of chapter 5 and chapter 6. John begins sometime after this, but if you do the math, that's 6 months. And Jesus is going to do something Elisha did in 1 Kings 4. Elijah fed 100 men with 20 loaves of bread. So this is reflected in the Hebrew Bible. But we're looking for Andrew. So sometime after this, Jesus crosses the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous sign he performed on the sick. When Jesus went up on the hillside and sat down with his disciples. And we know in Judaism, when you sit down, that means you're going to teach. That's the sign you're going to teach. When you stand up, if you stand up to read, you sit down to teach. And so he sat down with his disciple. The Jewish Passover feast was near. What does that mean? That means it's a year until he dies on the cross, because he dies on Passover. My note says this is the second Passover of Jesus' ministry, and it appears he spends it in Galilee. So apparently he doesn't, the 3 big feasts, Pentecost, Passover, and Tabernacles, if you live within 25 miles, you had to go and celebrate those within the walls of the city. But Jesus lives 100 miles, so he doesn't have to go to be observant. He doesn't have to go to Jerusalem. And so apparently for this Passover, it says it's near. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Okay. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat?" Let me quote Dr. William Lane, and you're going to want to write this down because this is one of the best quotes. I quote this all the time. Dr. Lane used to say, "God always calls you to the level of your own inadequacy." God always calls you to the level of your own inadequacy. So Bill would say, don't just go do what you're good at. Anybody can do that. He said, go and be right on the edge so that the Lord doesn't show up to help you, you'll fail miserably. And is that not brilliant? I love that. And this was a guy, Harvard PhD, who spoke like 16 languages. You'll always work. And so what does Jesus do? There's 5,000 people, and you give them something to eat. You go, talk about the level of your own inadequacy. Where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat? And this is John because he's going to whisper in your ear and explain. I mean, if you learn to listen to the Gospels, you can tell which one is which. And so you can see, this is John. He only asked this to test him. Only John does that. Okay? For he already had in mind what he was going to do. So Philip answered, 8 months' wages, and that's 200 denarii, however much that is. 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, here we go, here's the person we're focusing on here. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves. And barley, you need to know that barley in the Mishnah, barley says that is only fit for beasts. When Roman soldiers were being punished, they forced them to eat barley bread. So this is so it's like we've got 5 really crummy loaves of bread. Okay, Mishnah says barley is food of beasts. What'd you say?
Gluten free.
Gluten free. Okay. Oh, there you go. Yeah, the Mishnah says that barley is the food of beasts. Yeah, when Roman soldiers were decimated, have you heard the term decimation? If a legion performed poorly in battle, the emperor could order that they be decimated. That doesn't mean they're wiped out. That means they line up in 10, in rows of 10. Every 10th person, on the order of the commanding officer, every 10th person steps forward and falls on his sword and kills himself. That's decimate. Well, the next time you're in battle and you want to run, are you going to run away? No, because if you do, your legion might be decimated. But the other 9 were forced to eat barley as their punishment. So one guy falls on his sword. I think I'll take the barley loaf, you know.
Yeah.
But
I'll count to 10 real fast. Yeah.
Huh?
I'll count to 10 real fast.
Yeah. But that's what decimation. That's what decimation comes from. If you can imagine that, living in a world where if someone orders you to, you fall on your sword. Those are Roman centurions, the people that Jesus encounters. They're like a Navy SEAL on a level. Okay, so Andrew, 5 small crummy barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass. Mark says it's green grass in that place. It's spring. And the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus took the loaf, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. Unmiraculous miracle. How does Jesus feed 5,000 people? He says the blessing. And that's, except for 2 examples, Jesus miracle, he'll heal somebody by saying, go. Or little girl, get up. He'll raise somebody from the dead. Little girl, get up. I called him the unmiraculous. He does not do miracles in such a way as to draw attention to himself. He always points away from himself. And so what does he do? He said he does what they do at every meal. He says a blessing, and then with 5 crummy loaves of bread, he feeds 5,000 people. Let me give you what I call the math of the 2 feedings. This is one of the twin events. One of the things I'm studying is all the twin events. There are 2 storms on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus tears up the temple twice. There are 2 miraculous feedings. There's about 8 things that happen twice. And the miraculous feeding is one of them. So the 5,000 is the first one. And I call it the lesson of the leftovers. The lesson of the 2 feedings is not necessarily the miracle itself, but what the leftovers are all about. Okay? And after the feeding of the 5,000, they pick up 12 kofinos, 12 lunch pail baskets. So the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 is perfect provision. So Jesus says, don't let anything, it's very Jewish. Don't let the crumbs be wasted. So you don't, like your mom saying, they're poor people in Africa, so you clean your plate. It's that kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. So they pick up the crumbs after 5,000 people, and all they can get are 12. Kofanoi is the plural, little creel that you put a string around your neck and carry your lunch. So the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 is perfect provision. There's just enough for the 12. The miracle of the feeding of the 4,000 is abundance because they pick up 7, and this is a different basket. It's a man-sized basket. 7 basketfuls, huge basketfuls of leftovers. So one miracle is perfect provision, and you got to see perfect provision. I got a real good story if I can remember it. I was on the road somewhere, and our well had broken, and it was $1,200 to put a new motor on the bottom of the pipe. And I was actually in Israel, and I'm talking to my wife on the phone, and the guy Fred, can't think of his last name, but anyway, the guy that did the videos. I'm I'm like talking to her on the phone, and Fred comes in. He goes, I need to talk to you. So I put the phone down, and he said, you know, you've been here like 2 weeks, and I did it for free because I got a free trip to Israel out of it. He said, we feel bad, so we feel like we need to give you something. So he gives me a check for $1,200. See, perfect. Now, if it had been 12,000 or 12 million, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be looking at a big screen TV, morbidly obese, you know, drinking beer or something. But you see how that's a big. In some ways, it's bigger a miracle than abundance. We talk about abundance, but how many times have you needed something, and usually it's monetary, and the Lord sends just what you need. It's like, I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. So the miracle of this is when they pick up the leftovers. There's 12 baskets. So he gives thanks. He distributes. He did the same with the fish. They don't pick up the leftovers of the fish. That makes sense. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather." And in Hebrew it's called the Peah, P-E-A-H. I mean, and you don't waste leftovers. Why? Because that's an insult to God, because God provides food. So the Peah is the leftovers. So gather the Peah that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. The rabbi said, great will be the punishment of those who waste the crumbs of bread. That's in the Talmud. So they gathered them and filled 12 kophinoi, lunch pail baskets, with pieces of the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. But so what I'm trying to do, with Andrew, and I want to encourage you to do this. I'm looking at each one of the disciples, like Peter. I'm summarizing. He's the primary disciple. Most detail about him. He's the closest to Jesus. The greatest, one of the greatest betrayals of Jesus, because he was so close. They have a unique relationship. Andrew, he was a disciple of John. He's the 4th person in the 3. He's the first to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. But he's resourceful, because that's from this story I get, in some sense he goes, well, we got 5 barley loaves, right here, 2 fish, So he's, to a certain extent, he's resourceful. He finds the boy with the fish and bread. And he's perceived as someone you need, if you're going to connect with Jesus, you need to talk to him. And that's going to be the last story about Andrew that we look at. But I'm going to do this for when I finish with each one, kind of get ready to teach. I'm going to write down whatever character sketch I can. So that's as far as I've gotten. Okay, so he's from that I say he's resourceful. Here's I think the last story. Is there one? No, there's two. There's two.
Some people kind of make a thing about how there were 5,000 men.
Yes.
And then they extrapolate that there were actually more people.
20,000, 25. Yeah. I think that's reasonable. Yeah. You only count them in. That's the world. Now, that is not to say Judaism is somehow anti-woman of kind of ancient religion. Judaism, I mean, the provision for divorce in Judaism, that's a protection for women. There are a lot of, provisions that are made in the law to protect women, and I think women were more highly regarded. But it's still an ancient culture, and if we're going to count the crowd, we're going to count the men. That's just how we do it, But there's a couple of Craig Keener, who's a great New Testament scholar, estimated the crowd was 25,000. But he also said that was the seating capacity of the amphitheater in Ephesus, and John is writing to people who are in Ephesus. So I don't know. Only Craig Keener would see that, make that connection. Oh yeah, the Ephesus. Yeah, there's 25. That's 25,000 seats. Yeah, he's that kind of a super nerd, super Bible nerd. I want to be him. It's like him. Okay, so perfect provision versus abundance. Okay, now this is John 12:20. Now, at this point, this is what I call a significant substitution. Remember, 92% of John is unique. 92% of John isn't in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And at this point in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we have the second temple cleansing. Okay? John leaves that out. What does John do? John gives us the first temple cleansing because Jesus did it twice. The first public thing he did and the last public thing were to run the the traders out of the temple. Okay, so I call this is a significant substitution. He left the second one out. At this point, he has the coming of the Greeks. Now, why would these Gentile? They're still believers. They're Gentile converts to Judaism. Why would they come to Jesus at this point? Well, they just saw him tear up the temple. Now, John doesn't say that, but I'm saying, John leaves out the second temple cleansing and he gives us the coming of the Greeks. So maybe there's a chance that's why they've come. Jesus has made a place for them because the court of the Gentiles was where they set up the marketplace. See, so they're going to come thinking we want to see Jesus. This is what he just did for us. So these are God-fearers, referred to in Acts 17:4. That's a Gentile who, doesn't become a full convert. Got to get circumcised to do that, but they observe all the laws of Judaism. Okay, they're God-fearers. We talked about that last week, and I gave that gross example that I won't repeat because everybody got grossed out when I gave it. So this is John 12:20. Now there were certain Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. They came to Philip, and Philip is also, by the way, a Greek name. It means a lover of horses. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. And again, I think they've come in response to what Jesus has just done. Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Now, again, I'm trying to squeeze this dry, but my perception is, if you want to get to Jesus, Andrew is a guy he's the fourth member of the three. So Philip's not going to go straight to Jesus. He goes, hey, would you go? We're going to ask about this. And the wonderful thing is that Jesus sees the coming of the Greeks as a sign. The fact that Gentiles have come to him, he almost kind of does a soliloquy here in 23. Jesus says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. It's a sign that Gentiles have come. They're God-fearers, but they're Gentiles. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls on the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds, and on he goes. But so again, just trying to squeeze this dry, I think there's something about Andrew. He's the fourth member of the three. And if you're going to come to Jesus, even if you're Philip goes to Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip both go to see Jesus. I could be completely wrong. I will not be dogmatic about that. I'm just trying to squeeze this dry. Okay, one more. And this is the passage where Andrew is included with the three. And this is Mark 13. Okay? Mark 13. Verse 1. As he was leaving the temple, he's torn up the temple. This is after the second temple cleansing, which happens in Mark, I think 7. In 11. In Mark 11, Jesus tears up the temple for the second time. So he's leaving the temple, and he's mad, I think. And what do the disciples do? They make small talk. I think that's my interpretation. As he's leaving the temple, one of the disciples said to him, look, what?
To distract him from
Yeah.
saying,
I think so. Look at what they say. Look, teacher, what massive stones. What magnificent buildings. Well, Jesus had been there his whole life. He's seen the massive stones in the big building. They're making small talk. And I think he's still, angry or still wound up. Because listen to his response. Do you see these great buildings? Jesus said, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. And in 70 AD, that's exactly what happened. And I can show you pictures of the pile of rubble from that temple where they pushed the rocks over the walls. And there's a huge, huge pile. So great buildings. Yeah, you see these buildings? Not one stone's going to be left on top of the other. Everyone's going to be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, which is opposite the temple, it's on the other side of the valley, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, Andrew, the fourth member of the three, they asked him privately. That's important. So they go to him privately. Tell us two questions. When will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled? Now, the other Gospels, when they tell that story, like if you know, Matthew 24 tells the same story. And it works better with Matthew 24. They say, when will these things happen? Not one stone will be left on the other. And in Matthew 24, the second question, and what is the sign of the coming of the end of the age? So they ask two questions, I think. And of course, to them, when Jesus talks about the temple being destroyed, that sounds like the end of the world. Well, that is the end of their world. Okay? And what happens, and we're not going to take time to look at it, but I encourage you to look at it. Jesus will give them two completely separate answers, and the answers are fascinating. The first answer, when will these things happen? He talks about something that you can run away from. He'll say, pray that your flight won't be in winter, right? How bad it's going to be for pregnant women and nursing mothers. He's talking about people running away. And the truth is, in 70, when the Romans surrounded or began to surround Jerusalem, a lot of Christians fled to a city called Pella, and they survived. Whereas thousands and thousands of people were killed. They were killing each other. Jews were killing each other inside the walls of Jerusalem. So when will these things happen? Jesus gives them very concrete answers. He describes something that you can run away from. And then the second question, and what will be the sign of the coming of the end of the age? And then when he answers the second question, he goes, and after these things, the stars will fall from the sky, the moon will turn to blood. You know, and two women will be grinding grain, one will be taking the other left. He's describing something you can't run away from. This cataclysm of the second coming. See what I'm saying? So I put to you, it's the only way his answers make any sense. There's two questions. One that's answered in when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70, when not one stone is left on top of the other. And then the answer to the second question, what will be the sign of the coming of the end of the age? It's apocalyptic. Stars fall from the sky. You know, nobody's running away from that. Two people are there, one disappears and one's left. So that meant a lot to me. Yeah, and anyway, take a look at that on your own, or maybe someday we'll look at it together. Okay, so there's Andrew. Let's look at James. Yaakov. Now there are three Jameses, and one of the commentaries I've looked at was very adamant that we get straight, you know, who these Jameses are. And the one we're looking at, this is James. He's sometimes described as James the Greater, but he's the son of Zebedee. Peter, James, and John. He's one of the three. Okay. The other James is a disciple called James, the son of Alphaeus, and I think he's Matthew's brother. He's the other James, and of course the other most famous James is Jesus' brother, James. So those are the three Jameses that we have. Okay?
And the one that wrote the book of James is
That's Jesus' brother. Yeah. Okay.
But only one James is a disciple.
Yes. No. We got two. We got James the son of Alphaeus,
Okay.
and we got James the son of Zebedee.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I wasn't being very clear. What? I'm not anywhere yet. I'm just talking about him yet. I'm nowhere. Okay.
Which of those James was his brother?
The one who wrote the gospel. He took leadership after Peter left. He became the head of the church. Jesus had four brothers, well, half brothers, right? James, Jude. He had a brother named Jude, who also wrote one of the letters. Joseph and Simon. Yeah, they're named. He's got four brothers, and I don't know how many sisters. So Jesus grows up in a house of 9 people. 4, 5, 6. Him and Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. There's 9 people in this house. I think it's cool that we know his brothers' names. I wish I'd give anything to know his sister's name. And how many there were. Wouldn't you love to know that? At one point they'll say, you know, aren't his sisters here with us? Or something like that. But so they're referred to. But anyway, this is James, the son of Zebedee. His brother is John. This is the one in Mark, and we'll look at this in Mark 3:17. They get all mad and they want to destroy the Samaritans. I think they're Samaritans. And Jesus gives them a nickname. the sons of thunder. He's one of the sons of thunder. He's the first disciple to die, to be martyred. That's Acts 12:2. Herod cuts his head off. He's beheaded. So these two brothers are the bookends. John is the last to die. You know, he lives up into his 90s. In fact, he lives to be so old. This is dealt with in the end of the Gospel of John. A rumor starts that Jesus is going to come back before he dies, because nobody lives to be in their 90s in this world. It's a miracle, and that's and his brother's James. So that's the son of thunder. I never tell you the same rumor happened with who's the guy that sang with Billy Graham? George Beverly Shea. Okay, George Beverly Shea lived up into his 90s, and in the Graham organization, a rumor started that Jesus was going to come back. I mean, completely separate of this. There were people that were actually saying he lived so long. I think, maybe 100 or almost 99 or something. He lived to be long, really old. And the same rumor started, and I can remember being at the Graham organization, hearing somebody say that rumor, and I go, guys, John 21, So yeah, so people still make stuff like that up. There's a tradition, and I don't want to get into these, but there's a tradition that he was a missionary to Spain, but that's a very slippery slope when you get into things that were written much later. But one of the most important things I think about James and John is they are almost certainly Jesus' cousins. They're related. And we did this, but let me do it again. There's a woman of the three women. One of in Mark 15:46, we have her name, Salome, which is the feminine form of Shalom. Okay, Mark 15:46, there's a woman named Salome. Matthew 20:46, also one of the three women. She's described as the mother of Zebedee's sons. So that makes her James' mom. In John 19:25, she's described as his mother's sister. Jesus' mother's sister. Now, this could be three totally different women. But she's described with the two other women. She's one of the three, so I think it's the same woman. And my academic reason is I really want it to be this way because I think it's so cool. So there's a chance that James and John are first cousins. Jesus entrusts his mother to John from the cross. They're cousins. That makes perfect sense. Okay. So let's look at a couple passages that have James. This is the calling of the first disciples. This is Matthew 4:18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and it's a big lake. It's not a sea. It's not that big. It's 13 miles tall and 6 miles wide. If there's a boat on the lake, you can always see it. That's how small it is. Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee. He saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. Now we know from John 1:40 that they've already met. Okay, so this is not a cold call. Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net, that is a hand net. It's like 8 to 10 feet in a circle with little weights, and you throw it and it fans out into a circle and goes down and you catch fish. That's one kind of net. Deep drafting nets between two boats is the other way they caught things, fish. And a line and a hook. That's from Matthew 17 when Jesus sends Peter out to catch the fish with a coin in his mouth. He's got a hand line with a hook. So that's the three ways they catch fish. So they're casting these throwing nets into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. Wonderful way to get someone's attention who's a fisherman. At once, they left their nets and followed him. Follow me is not an invitation, it's a command. So come, follow me. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, who were focusing on, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee preparing their nets. So they're cleaning the big draft nets that they drop in between the two boats. Preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and once again, immediately, immediately, they left the boat and their father and followed him. So that's the calling. That's the calling of James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Okay? Here's the transfiguration. This is Luke 9:28. Just as an aside, in Exodus 33:18, one of the people that's at the transfiguration is Moses. In Exodus 33:18, Moses asked to see God's glory. I know this sounds crazy, but I wonder if Moses had been transported in time to this moment. I know that's crazy.
Nothing is impossible with God.
Exactly. You know, I just think it's a really cool. That's my academic
And
freedom.
Elijah.
And Elijah. Elijah's there too. But I'm just saying, in Acts 33:18, Moses asked God, show me your glory. And, you know, I don't know. My note also says, the three aren't necessarily the most gifted. They may be the most needy. That may be why Jesus called them. About 8 days after this, Jesus took Peter, John, and James with him up on a mountain to pray. As he was praying, and only Luke gives that detail because Luke emphasizes prayer. Everything significant that happens, Jesus is praying as it happens. So as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. His clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. And you're thinking, well, what would they be talking about? Well, Luke's going to tell you. They spoke about his departure, and the word there is the Greek word exodus. So Jesus is talking to Moses about his exodus. That is Jesus' exodus. And what's happening here is, you know, the great central section of Luke from chapter 9 to chapter 19 is the last journey to Jerusalem. That's the thing Luke is the most interested in. And so in a few verses, Jesus is going to resolutely, I think verse 51, he is going to resolutely set his face for Jerusalem. And that's 10 chapters of Luke. They're going to Jerusalem for the last time. So Jesus is having this moment with Moses and Elijah. What are they talking about? They're talking about Jesus' departure. And Luke tells us that right before Jesus departs. Yeah.
How do you think they did that was Moses and
I
Elijah?
have no idea. I have no idea. Just insight. How do they know it's Moses and Elijah? Spiritual insight? I don't know. Maybe they saw the Ten Commandments and they recognized Charlton. Maybe they knew it was from listening to what they were talking about. I just don't know. But that's a great question.
They would have had those name tags. It says mine.
Yeah, name tag. Of course. And the name tags are like real shiny. So.
Yeah, they're talking about his ascension.
Huh?
They're talking about his ascension.
No, this is called the transfiguration. This isn't the ascension.
No, but
There's
there's
a departure.
the departure.
Yeah, well, the Greek word there is exodon, exodos, which means to depart.
I know, but what do they mean by it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. In Luke, the final journey to Jerusalem is the central 10 chapters.
Oh, he's just gonna depart from wherever he is there.
And go into Jerusalem. And you know what? It might mean both things. They might mean death. And that's the other thing. In Greek, a word means one thing. In Hebrew, it can mean lots of things. So I don't know. But I think it has to do with the fact that they're about to leave for Jerusalem. Because see what it says. They spoke with him about his exodus, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. So maybe that's the trip to Jerusalem, and maybe that's his ascension. My note says, this is all to prepare for the travel narrative. Yeah, which starts in verse 51, Jesus resolutely sets out for Jerusalem. So, and again, I wouldn't be dogmatic about any of it, but I just know his departing for this last 10 chapters of Luke is a big deal. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing beside him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it is good for us to be here. And I've had it explained to me that that can also be a question. Master, is it good for us to be here? This, this glory in Judaism, this might not be a good thing. So you can decide as well as the translator can. Because he wants to put up 3 shelters. So are these commemorative shelters, or are these shelters to protect them from glory? I don't know. I like the first answer because I don't know. It's got a certain amount of zip to it. But anyway, and the word for shelters there is a word that can be a tabernacle, like Jewish tabernacles, or a sanctuary. So is it good for us to be here, or it's good for us to be here? Let's put up 3 sanctuaries. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. So it was certainly the wrong thing to have said.
Mike,
Yeah.
just a real quick stupid question.
No.
Sanctuary or the tabernacle,
Yeah.
tent tabernacle,
Yeah.
shrine.
Yeah.
Is this where the Crusaders got the idea that every time we go to a holy place in Jerusalem, we're going to put up a
I
shrine?
have no idea.
I mean, was there ever a reference specifically to that? As to, I don't know the Roman Catholic
Yeah.
Bible.
Well, I know there's a church. They built a church of the Transfiguration.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons why they did stuff like that. but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And again, is Peter commemorating the fact that they saw this transfiguration? And are the 3 shelters for Peter, James, and John, or are they for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah? Who are the 3 shelters for? And I think if he's afraid and he's saying, is it good for us to be here? Let's build 3 shelters. So again, that's not a popular way of reading it, but I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to try to figure this out. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared. So he didn't have to have protective shelter. A cloud appears and enveloped them. And they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, this is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Now in chapter 8, verse 18, Jesus had just said, consider carefully how you listen. And now God is saying, listen to my son. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves until no one at that time that they had seen. And my guess is Jesus probably told them not to say anything about it, because that was his habit. But again, I wouldn't.
He was alone with the other 2 left. What does it mean he was alone?
Well, Moses and Elijah are gone,
Right.
and Jesus is there just with the 3 of them. Yeah. And they said to, I don't know who witnessed it, wrote it down. Luke spoke to some eyewitness. I think it was probably Peter, because it says Peter and his companions. Sounds like he was talking to Peter when he got the story. Okay, here's the Sons of Thunder business. This is Luke 9, 51. And again, this is the beginning of the travel narrative between chapters 9 and 19 in Luke. They're walking to Jerusalem, 10 chapters. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him. I think maybe that's the 70, or part of the 70. Okay, we don't know for sure. They went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. Oh, and here's where you hear this. Oh, Jesus was so open to the Samaritans. He was, he wasn't like, the Judean Jews were so critical of the Samaritans. Well, the truth is, Galileans didn't have that big a problem with Samaritans. Jesus goes through Samaria all the time. And for a Galilean, that was not a big deal. That's one of the reasons Judean Jews were kind of prejudiced against Galilean Jews, because Galilean Jews were so open to the Samaritans, and the whole Samaritan schism. My note says Jews and Samaritans took turns desecrating each other's Passovers. In 6 AD, just before Passover, the Samaritans dug up some dead men's bones and they threw them into the temple. right before Passover. Okay? To making it, they did this all the time. The next Passover, the Jews burnt the Samaritan temple to the ground. So you don't get in that kind of, exchange with the Jesus
The
people.
Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah, on a big scale. But isn't that something that they would do? That they hated them so much, they dug up dead men's bones and threw them into the temple court, and they didn't have Passover in the temple that year because it was unclean. That's 6 A.D. that happened.
It's like terrorists.
Huh?
It's like terrorists.
Yeah. It's exactly like that. Yeah. Well,
I was just saying that hatred goes back a long way.
it does. But that's Judean, and that, again, the Greek word judaioi, which is usually translated Jews, and people think it's a cause for a lot of anti-Semitism, because sometimes the Jews are the bad guys. There are translators now who want to say, no, that means Judeans. The problem is with that Jesus is having is with Judeans. They're Jewish. But he doesn't have that same problem, not to that extent, in Galilee. He has other problems in Galilee. But anyway, okay. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, okay, he sent messenger ahead. They went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him, but the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. But he's going to a Samaritan town. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them? Now, it doesn't tell us here that this is where they got their nickname from. That's Mark 3:17. But I think it's pretty certain that that's why Jesus calls them the sons of thunder. Okay? And the interesting thing is, they just seem to assume that they can do it. Right?
Yeah.
You've been hanging out 3 years with a guy who raises people from the dead. Now, there's only one of Jesus' miracles that's ever described as destructive, and that's when he speaks to the fig tree and the next day it's withered. And some people say that's the only destructive miracle. But they want to call down fire. And Jesus in verse 5 had just said, if you go into a town and the people offend you, shake the dust off your... So this is a little more severe than shaking the dust off your garment because you're offended. We're going to burn them into, So I don't think they'd been listening. They weren't listening at verse 5.
What are the arrangements? It says to make arrangements, like to stay overnight or
Yeah.
food and sleep.
Yeah, all that stuff, because he's got at least 12 people with him, and probably a whole lot more than that. And there's no hotels. They're staying in Jewish homes. So my guess is you get to a town and you say, Jesus is coming. Can he sleep in the synagogue? Because the synagogues always had guest rooms. I think they spent the night in synagogues a lot, or stayed in homes. Yeah. Can we call down fire from heaven? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. I would love to have heard what he said. Okay, here's one.
Mine has a footnote right there.
What does it say?
It says, some late,
Manuscript.
yes.
Yeah.
You do not know of what kind of spirit you are, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy people's lives, but to save them.
Yeah. That sounds good to me. But obviously it's
So
a
that
later.
was a rebuke.
It's a later manuscript, so we don't know for sure. But yeah, maybe there was a manuscript when he said, and that sounds like something he'd say. One more. Let's do one more real quick. And this is when they want to sit on thrones beside him. This is another little insight into James and John. Now he's just told them in Matthew 19:28 and Luke 22:30 that they're going to sit on 12 thrones. Okay, so it's not completely out of line that they say, "Can we sit at your right and your left? We're all going to be on the throne, so can we sit next to you?" So. And again, this is the first and the last to die.
Where are you now? Where are you?
I'm sorry, Mark 10:35. Thanks for asking. And Jesus has been talking about his death in the last few verses, and so I don't think they heard. But listen to the way they ask him. This is almost childlike. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And Dr. Lane used to say, it's like a little kid saying, say you're going to do it. I'm not going to tell you yet, but say you'll do it, And Dr. Lane would say, no good parent would ever respond to that. So he pushes the button. What do you want me to do for you? I'm not going to just, give you. They replied, and again, in Matthew 19 and Luke 22, he's just told them they're going to sit on 12 thrones. So there is a connection here, but Mark doesn't tell you what the connection is. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, said Jesus, because in a few days, being at his right and his left was going to mean hanging on a cross, right? So they're thinking about thrones. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup? And that's always a metaphor for suffering. Can you drink the cup or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? My note says to receive the glory you must experience the suffering. We can, they answered. And Jesus said, you will drink the cup. And he's talking to the first and the last to die. You will drink the cup and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. And wouldn't you love to know who that is? When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And my note says they became indignant because they didn't think of it first. And Jesus called them together and said, and this is a little lesson on radical reversal. If you don't get this, you don't get Jesus and you don't get Christianity. You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. He's using Gentiles as a negative example. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Now, in a few days, he's going to wash their feet. So he's been talking about it, but he's going to powerfully demonstrate that in just a few days. Anyone who wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to serve, to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And my note says, go read Isaiah 53, because that's the description of the suffering servant. We'll stop right there. So there's kind of an insight into James, and we'll look at some different passages of John. We got one more James to do. Maybe we'll just skip it. Actually, it's just really one verse from Acts 12. We can do this. Acts 12:1 says, it was about that time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. So that's Acts 12:1. John, the first one to die. The one who wanted the throne. So, let me pray. Lord, we want to know you, and if this is going to help, we pray that you would empower us to understand these men who are around you, that you chose and who were with you and who misunderstood you and who loved you and gave their lives for you and all these things. We want to know you, and we want to be part of that group of your disciples who see that servanthood is what we're called to, not thrones. Washing feet is what we should be doing for each other. So help us to learn from these men, from their foibles, and from anything that we can learn from them. We just want to know you, and that's what we're asking. And